So this is about exploring the behaviour and beliefs of international students towards AI writing tools. It was the research was conducted by me and my colleague Zander, but he couldn't make it today. So the first bullet point there is becoming a bit of a cliche, isn't it? Like 2022 was the year when everything changed. Yes, I think as we can all probably remember, in 2022, the release of ChatGPT did generate a lot of conversation, a lot of speculation in higher education about the implications that this would have on things like academic misconduct and the future of assessment. And I probably should have put on there that how we teach as well. I think when it initially came out, I was probably more concerned about assessments, but now I think a few years in, the actual teaching implications are becoming increasingly clear and important. Universities have tried to adapt their approach to assessments in various ways, but I think in order to adapt effectively, we need to know how students are using AI and what their beliefs are about AI. And that was basically my motivation for doing this research. So the research aims were to, I should say, first of all, this study was conducted on my own students, or kind of broadly speaking, my own students, the kind of students that I teach at the International Pathway College. The goal was to investigate how the adoption and impact of AI writing tools, among those students on both pathway and pre-sessional programs. So, on the foundation program and the pre-masters program and all of the different pre-sessions that we run there. And the research questions that we decided to focus on were which AI writing tools are most commonly used by them. So we wanted to know, what tools they're using, to what extent and for what purposes do they use AI in their writing tasks. So how much are they using it, and how, for what particular tasks? Also, what ethical beliefs do they hold about the use of AI for writing? Obviously, all of us who work in higher education will have our own beliefs about what is an appropriate or an inappropriate use of AI, but what do students think? And how do they perceive the role of these tools in enhancing or undermining their learning? So there is, there have been a fair number of similar studies run, and I'm going to look at a couple of studies that have been conducted elsewhere because I think they present a really useful point of comparison. The sample size for my study, as I'll explain later, was relatively small. So comparing it to other international studies does strengthen the reliability of the results. The first one was conducted at Harvard by Deschênes and McMahon, and they surveyed 360 undergraduate and graduate students at Harvard, and they focused on things like usage patterns, concerns, and the guidance students needed. Second study was conducted at ETH Zurich by Balabdawi, I hope I pronounced that right, and et al. 2024. This was a larger study. They got a very decent sample size here of 4,800 students. And they investigated beliefs about AI, reliability, its role in learning, and academic integrity. Another study, the Higher Education Policy Institute has conducted this survey twice. They surveyed, in the most recent case, they surveyed 1,041 undergraduate students at UK universities. This was, the data gathering was in 2024, published in 2025. And they tracked usage patterns and attitudes towards AI. And then there's another study by the University of Northampton, which conducted surveys in 2023 and 24, with 129 and 138 respondents respectively. And they gathered insights into student usage and concerns about AI over time. So what did they find out about the prevalence of AI? So all of them showed a significant increase in the prevalence of AI among students. So the HEPI research found that 92% of students had used GAI tools, generative AI tools, up from 66% the previous year. For assessments, usage had jumped from 53 to 88%. Northampton, the survey conducted in Northampton found that 52% of students reported using AI in 2024, which was a significant increase from 32% in 2023. Harvard found that 64% had used or intended to use AI, with graduate students being more likely adopters than undergraduates, which is quite interesting. And this, as I'll show you, was similar to my findings, that postgraduates were more open to using AI than undergraduates. So just, I would have assumed it would have been the other way around, actually. But yeah, quite interesting. So how are they actually using AI? So according to the surveys that in the literature research, there was a clear pattern that students primarily were using AI as a tool to support their learning process, rather than using it to kind of replace learning, or at least this was what they would admit to. Obviously, there are issues with a survey being a self-selecting sample, but the most popular uses for AI. So among the HEPI respondents, 58% said that they used AI for explaining concepts. Summarizing articles and making notes was a major use of it, with 48% of HEPI respondents and 70 to 80% of respondents at Northampton. So that was, between the 2 years, I think it was 70 in the first year and then 80 in the following year. 41% of HEPI respondents said that they were using it for suggesting research ideas or brainstorming. So these were probably the main uses that the literature suggested that students were using it for. In the Harvard study, it was more responses to open questions, and they found that students were using it for things like help with comprehension, suggesting improvements to their work, brainstorming, checking understanding. So all of these things were frequently cited in the open question responses. In terms of ethics, what we found, what the previous studies found, and this is again will be mirrored in my research, is that students' ethical views largely correspond with their reported behaviours. So the things which they think are ethical are the ways that they're using AI. Perhaps that's not surprising, but I think it's kind of worthy of note. So the things which they think, so for example, explaining concepts, summarizing articles, suggesting research ideas were some of the main things which HEPI found students were using AI for. And only 6% believed that it was ethical to submit AI-generated work without editing. However, interestingly, in the behaviour thing, 8% said that they had submitted AI-generated work without editing. So there's a small percentage who knowingly do it when they think it's unethical. There is, ETH Zurich, and this is just my own speculation, they found that 30% considered AI use in written assessments legitimate, with another 37% saying that it depends, which seems quite a lot higher than at the other universities. It could be that this is because it's a technical university and their sample included a high proportion of students doing things like engineering and informatics. So I don't know whether students studying those disciplines are more open-minded about AI. In terms of kind of ethical concerns, there were some students who felt that it was plagiarism, quite a high proportion there at Harvard, 64%, that it undermined learning. There was also, obviously a repeated theme, and something which most of us are quite conscious of with AI is a lack of trust in the output, the hallucinations. And, in the open responses at Northampton, hallucinations were mentioned, and a lack of creativity. One of the more memorable comments from the ETH Zurich study was one student said that ChatGPT suffers from the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I think we can, if you've experimented with these AI models, you will have noticed that sometimes they kind of confidently say something which, might not be right, or might be a kind of distortion or an inaccurate representation of truth. There may be some evidence that students are a bit more AI skeptical. So the survey at Northampton showed a decline in students using AI to generate new written content from 75 to 52%. So that's quite a big drop off, which might suggest that they're becoming a bit more critical about it. So one of the big differences that was found in the Northampton study was a huge difference between home and international students' attitudes to AI. 63% of international students felt positive about advancements in AI, compared to only 5% of home students. And the home students in the open questions expressed a wide range of serious concerns about things like academic integrity, intellectual property, data protection, whereas very few international students expressed similar concerns. So there's quite a big difference there. Getting back to mine and Zander's study, we, just to give you a kind of summary of the methodology that we used. So it was a mixed method study using an anonymous online survey. We managed to, we sent out the survey using the student emails to all of the students from the 23 to 24 year group at the International Pathway College. We got 53 responses, which is probably about a quarter or a fifth of the cohort. Of those respondents, 83% were preparing for postgraduate study, so they would have been on the either the pre-masters or pre-sessional programs. Pre-sessional programs are our largest. We have a lot of students on the pre-sessional programs usually. The other programs are a bit smaller, and 17% undergraduate, heavily tilted towards East Asian nationalities, 70% Chinese, and of the remainder, I think most of them were from places like Japan and South Korea as well. The survey was distributed via Qualtrics in August to September 2024. So we sent it out after the final grades were concerned, because we thought that, with us, because we both work at the International Pathway College, we didn't want students to think that we were kind of, trying to catch them cheating or anything like that. That we were gathering, academic integrity data or something like that. We wanted it to be separate, so we waited until the grades were confirmed. And obviously, the emails that we sent out reassured respondents that it was completely anonymous, and we were not, looking for, we were not going to identify them or anything like that. But, of course, there's still, as I said before, there is a self-selecting aspect to any kind of voluntary piece of research. So it could be that, in fact, it's probably quite likely that some of the students who are using AI in less appropriate ways did not participate. And that's probably true of all of the surveys that I've mentioned. So in terms of the questions, we included multiple choice, Likert scale, and open-ended questions. And in terms of the data analysis, so I'll be showing you some frequency graphs. We also did inferential statistics, which, need to be taken with a grain of salt because of the small sample size. But I think, I'll show you the results, and I think they are fairly clear. So there is a fairly strong pattern that I'll show you. Also, we've got some very interesting responses to the open-ended questions. So first of all, in terms of what AI tools students are using, in terms of the new generative AI tools, the one, not surprisingly, the one that we found was most popular was ChatGPT. This was sent out before DeepSeek was released, so we don't have DeepSeek on here. So about 86% of students had used ChatGPT. If you're looking at the graph, the dark blue bars are people using the free version of the product, and the light blue, people who paid for a subscription. You can see that 25% of students had paid for a ChatGPT subscription, which is considerably more than any of the other products. However, in terms of overall popularity, Google Translate was still more popular, and more people had used that than ChatGPT. Grammarly was about the same popularity as ChatGPT. So those kind of older, perhaps more conventional writing tools, language enhancement tools, were still more popular than ChatGPT. The next graph we've got here is behaviour beliefs about the use of AI for academic writing. So on the bar graph there, the light green bar, the green bar is using AI in this way enhances learning. The light blue bar is it's ethical to use AI in this way, and the dark blue bar is I have used AI in this way. So that's behaviour, and the other two are opinions. So I think what we can see here is that students' behaviour closely maps onto what beliefs they hold about the ethics and the implications for learning of different tools. That's probably the most noticeable pattern in the data here, I think. I think also in terms of how students are using it, so you can see at the top, I suppose this is loosely following the process of writing an assignment. At least the first few categories are. So you've got brainstorming at the top there, writing an outline, writing a first draft, writing a section of a paper and submitting without editing, or writing a whole paper without editing. And you can see that for some of the planning tasks, such as brainstorming or writing an outline, quite a lot of students are using AI tools. A few of them are using it for first draft, but none of them said that they had used it for writing a whole section or writing a whole paper. Although 2% thought that it might enhance learning to do so. And then the lower ones there, you've got translating language, giving feedback on content and language of a paper written in English, and explaining difficult concepts and new vocabulary. So you can see the main uses there are giving feedback and explaining difficult concepts and new vocabulary. So it seems that students are using it more in a sort of iterative way to enhance their learning, rather than just kind of straight up getting AI to do their homework for them. So this, we've got a number of statements here that students were asked to agree or disagree with. And you can see, on the left, you've got strongly agree in dark blue, and on the right, we've got strongly agree. And on the left, we've got strongly disagree in orange. I think, maybe actually starting with the bottom two. Very few students there think that AI writing tools mean it is less important to have good English skills. The vast majority of them clearly think that it is still important to have good English skills, which is kind of reassuring, and this is one which is, specifically interesting because all of the respondents were international students. Also, only a very small proportion thought that using AI would make it easier to get a degree from a UK university. With some of the upper ones, there's a bit more of a mixed picture. So I need more guidance on how to use AI in an acceptable way. 34% were kind of neutral on that, and although a slightly larger percent said that they agree than disagree, is kind of more balanced. But then in the column below, I'm confident that I know how to use AI appropriately. 81% said that they know how to use AI appropriately, either agree or somewhat agree, which seems to be in contrast with the previous example. So, some interesting responses there. So we conducted some inferential tests to look for associations. To be honest, an awful lot of them came back inconclusive, but one of the things where there was quite a clear picture was in differences of opinion between undergraduates and postgraduates. So postgraduates, perhaps surprisingly in my view, were significantly more likely than undergraduates to have used AI, and more likely to think that it was ethical or enhanced learning. For all of these things like explaining concepts, brainstorming, receiving feedback on content and language, postgraduates were significantly more likely to have used them than undergraduates. And in terms of beliefs, postgraduates were more positive about using AI to brainstorm, using it to write an outline, with the question, using AI can help me to complete assignments more quickly. Undergraduates strongly disagreed, more than expected to this one. So undergraduates seem more AI skeptical than postgraduates, and this was something which one of the other studies found as well. Let's see. So just to summarize those findings, the main findings from the statistical analysis, ChatGPT was the most popular of the GAI tools, but Google Translate was more popular. Students used AI for tasks such as generating ideas and outlines, giving feedback and explaining concepts, but not for writing final versions. Student behaviours closely mapped onto their beliefs about the ethics of, and the learning impact of using AI. And undergraduates were significantly more skeptical than postgraduates about AI use. So these are some of the open question responses. This page, we've got some of the more positive, pro AI ones. I'll let you just have a quick read of those. So I think this one here is particularly
interesting. I use Grammarly to correct my mistakes and check my writing because I have dysgraphia and ADHD, and cannot check my writing by myself. It's interesting, the idea that AI tools or language enhancement tools might be how they could be useful for people with learning difficulties. And I think this one here as well is another interesting one. As I was a student on the pre-master's course, I did not write the paper in my own language and then translate it by AI, but there may be room for doing so in papers where the content is our own and we check it ourselves before submission. So I think what this student is getting at is it if you have the subject knowledge, if you know the subject, does it matter if you are using translation to write your assignments? If you can write an assignment in your own language and then translate it, if it's a good assignment, is that a problem? So, and it poses an interesting question for educators. What do we think about that? These are some of the more skeptical responses. So some of them mention things like critical thinking, reducing critical thinking skills. One here which says that it's not really ethically acceptable to use AI for the overall structure of a paper, but it might be okay to provide ideas and explain difficult concepts. And this one actually here as well mentions feeling suspicious of the explanations or information that AI provides. So this again is kind of coming back to that issue with hallucinations and the unreliability of the information provided by AI. Oh, sorry, this didn't look like this when I made my presentation. The text has somehow gone outside the speech bubble there. But this was one of the most interesting responses. I'm not sure why it's displaying in this way. But this student had been suspected of using AI, but they had not used it. And they said that some students that they knew had used AI a lot, and they received compliments for their work, presumably. And this student was suspected of using AI, and there was an academic misconduct case against them. So this is obviously, obviously it was very disappointing, very upsetting for this student to be accused of academic misconduct. So these are some of the key themes from the open questions, just to summarize them. So, many students have kind of what we could say is cautiously positive perceptions of AI use. Most of them have clear beliefs about the ethics of using AI. Some of them are concerned about the impact on things like critical thinking and learning. Some students mention problems with the functionality and accuracy of AI and its propensity for hallucinations. One student was very upset. There was that one student who was very upset about being falsely accused. But I think one of the interesting things there was, several students mentioning AI being used as, a kind of leveler, either for students with learning difficulties or English as a second language. So linking this back to the literature, so I think many of the findings of my research do support what was found in previous studies. So most students seem to be using AI as a learning partner, and they're certainly not acknowledging using it to kind of cheat or to replace learning. They seem to be using it iteratively and critically from what they're saying. They do seem to be developing a more critical stance towards AI. And their behaviour patterns follow their beliefs, which is similar to the HEPI study. And there's a greater receptiveness of postgrads to using AI compared to undergraduates, which is similar to Deschennes and McMahon's finding at Harvard, they also found this, which, as I said before, might be somewhat surprising. That's the end of my talk, really. But I don't know whether I should ask for your questions first or kind of pose my questions. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask me first? I'll allow you to ask me some questions.
I did have a few sort of observations and thoughts, maybe less than questions. So I think that there's some really stimulating points in the summary of the research studies and in your own experience in the IPC. I think some of them are related. I wonder if students are becoming more skeptical or more scared / educated, because as universities have probably caught up with student behaviour rather than led student behaviour. Initially it was a Wild West and students were doing things we didn't know they were doing, and now we're educating them about the way we think they should use AI, but we're also more vigilant and sanctioning what we deem inappropriate use. So are they becoming more skeptical of what AI might actually provide them, or are they becoming more cautious about using it in certain ways because they've been told that's inappropriate and they might get caught for doing something inappropriate? Maybe there's a question there for the further scrutiny, further research.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, are they actually, is the skepticism coming from their experiences of using AI, or their experiences of potentially being caught out, or believing that their teachers understand how they're using AI now?
Yeah, are we influencing their behaviour by the responses we're taking to the availability of AI, or are they becoming more self-equipped, self-confident in reflecting on their own behaviour and the outputs of the tools that they're using and changing their perception as a result?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I don't have an answer to that, but yeah, it would be. I'm not sure how we would find that out, really. Yeah, I mean, I suppose. Yeah, maybe in my next survey, I'll have to try and think if I can put an open question which might prompt some useful responses about that. Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
I wonder whether an explanation for PGT students having the approach they've got is if the PGT students, either through their previous study experience or potentially if they've had time in work before returning to study, have become more familiar with using AI or in different ways. Because when I speak to friends that work outside of the AG bubble, and certainly work rather than study, they're using AI in all sorts of different ways that aren't regulated by, such as academic integrity and rules about equity. They're taking shortcuts because they need to through work. They're using all sorts of different tools in imaginative ways to create marketing materials, to summarize information, to synthesize research. So I wonder whether postgraduate students that are returning to learning may have had experience of using AI in those kind of environments, got a different perception than to younger students, undergraduate students who may have come only through an education route, or perhaps more prominently through an education-only route, where there have been those different messages and the regulation.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're probably absolutely right about that. I think yes, I mean, I think in schools, obviously schools will almost certainly be strongly discouraging students from using AI, whereas in the world of work, it's less likely. Although, I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of our students at the IPC although we get a few who come to us who are older, the majority of them are coming directly from a degree, I would say. Most of them are around about sort of 23 years old, something like that. They're quite young. So, but it may be that they've had experience of using language enhancement tools in their previous degrees. It could also be, perhaps the sort of level of work, maybe. If you use AI, I used to be an IELTS examiner, and if you use AI to write a kind of IELTS style essay, it will do a fairly good job on it. If you use AI to try and write a university essay, it generally doesn't do a very good job. There'll be an academic certainly will be able to pick a lot of holes in it. And perhaps the students who are coming from school, where the standard of work is a bit simpler, and they're not expected to kind of put so much evidence, so many references, things like that. Maybe AI actually, can replace what they do. Whereas people who've been at university, they might be aware that AI is not really going to replace the work they do in academic research. Are we at the point that a department-wide or university-wide approach to what AI usage is appropriate? At the moment, we're discussing the levels and the ethics. Well, yes, I was just thinking that, bro.
Well, it's a question for Steve. We can pass the book further on. I think we are moving that way. We obviously updated the policy on acceptable assistance, etc., to move from what it first was about going out and getting an appropriate proofreader and limiting what proofreading could do to your essay, to accounting for the use of translation tools and software there. But it's things like today that are helping us go further. When it comes to my point, I think Steve talked about it as well in his introduction, comes back to that point that the university's playing catch up on the students' entrepreneurial behaviour or exploratory behaviours. So we're probably moving in this direction, maybe not as quickly enough as some people would like, to help them with their practice and to have those discussions with students.
Yeah, it seems to me that obviously there are kind of university-wide policies, but I think there's always going to be a need for individual departments and individual modules to have, variations on that depending on the requirements of that particular department or module. It seems to me that the university will need to have some kind of universal rules, but then they'll need to be maybe applied in a nuanced way in different departments.
One of the continuation of many PGTs having a professional background.
Yeah, as I said about that, probably, yeah, it might be something. Actually, it wasn't something which I asked on the survey, so maybe it's something I should think about asking if I conduct similar research in future to find out whether people have backgrounds in work and things like that.
I want to point about specifically about language use, because I think there's an interesting element there. You picked up on two different things: the use of AI as a resource, as a reasonable adjustment for students with learning difficulties. That might be a leveler. Questions about where the lines of acceptability there might be crossed. And then there's where it might be a leveler and an acceptable use where English not being the first language is what the disadvantage is and how far you can go to level playing field there. And then I think international, in the global context, this is interesting because in England, this is going to be important because one of our regulatory requirements is to ensure that we assess the technical proficiency of English at the level of the award we give.
Right. Yeah.
What I don't know is in the rest of the UK, under their different quality systems, what the equivalent or different approaches is there. But internationally, if students are studying in Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, the US in English, will they have a similar sort of expectation? Or is it about the knowledge? As long as you can learn the economics or the biology or the physics that you're here to learn as your degree, does it matter how you came to express that in your assignments in English?
Yeah.
So there's perhaps an interesting question there about the global market in HE and about the regulatory system that in England, if people are shortcutting things and they're using technology to present in English what we're expecting them to be able to do themselves, but in other places that isn't a requirement, that might be something that in the bigger scheme of things could affect student behaviours in the many ways that affect students' decisions about where to study, and then in our own approaches to how we regulate AI use in that area. I don't know, that might be a bit far-fetched, but I think there's certainly something there about our role in England of assessing language that might be different to in other contexts, particularly when you're looking at international research findings.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the regulations, I mean, obviously, like with the students that I teach, I come from an English language teaching background, so it's always been a big focus of what I do. But from a sort of regulatory point of view, obviously that is the regulation at the moment. But I suppose there is a question: should it be, or should we perhaps accept, if students have such effective translation tools, and they're probably not there yet, but maybe we're getting there fairly soon. Should we accept students just using translation and not bothering to learn the language? Would that be a good idea? I'm not sure really.
With yesterday's news, there's an interesting point there that students may get a visa to come here and study with a certain level of English, but then use tools to help them get their degree. Yet anybody wanting to come on a different kind of visa as an immigrant is supposed to have A-level standard English language, which I'm not entirely sure what A-level standard English language is, and really how they're going to properly assess it, and how many of the general population have what you might call A-level English.
I think I read somewhere, I'm not entirely sure if this is correct, but I don't think it's like you need to have the equivalent of an A-level in English. You need to have the equivalent of what you would have in French or German if you were doing French or German A-level. So like a foreign language A-level, which probably maybe is not an unreasonable requirement. I think at least in theory, most of the students coming to us should be somewhere close to that. I suppose it depends what courses they're going on to and things, but yeah. So not so much a question, but a thought. I wonder what contextual factors influence whether students decide to use AI or whether they see it as acceptable, useful. Thinking there might be higher pressures on PGT, short time frame, high cost, high competition. Yeah, that's quite possible. Yeah. I mean, actually, something I've been teaching, it might just be to do with the students we get at the IPC as well, partly. I've been teaching foundation students this week, and although obviously younger students, there are issues with it, but their level of English is probably higher on average than the postgraduate students, and that could be a factor as well. So there could be, but then on the other hand, it does, that finding about postgraduates and undergraduates did, I think it was the Harvard study, wasn't it, that had a similar finding on that. So that does kind of reinforce it. And that was the Harvard study was it wasn't just international students, it was with
you know, students from a variety of background.
There could be all sorts of contextual reasons.